Business Show. I'm your host, Kim Rain, an ADHD author, educator, coach, and the proud owner of a late ADHD diagnosis. In these lively, perfectly imperfect episodes packed with hacks, tips, and tricks, my guest experts and I are going to bring you motivation, education, and strategies on how to balance life, business, and ADHD so you can do things your brain's way and thrive with the confidence and the success that you deserve. So fasten your seatbelts, hold on to your hats, and scream if you want to go faster, because here we go. Hi guys, welcome back to the show. Today I am with Sarah Osborn. Sarah is the founder of So Nutrition, and she is a nutritionist and advanced ADHD coach. She is one of our students and graduates at the Neurodiversity Training Academy. Hello, Sarah.
Hi, Kim. Lovely to see you.
Thank you for joining us. So we were just talking and I said to you, because I remember when you signed up for the course and you said, I don't have ADHD. Is that going to be okay? And I was like, yeah, it's fine. You know, like for us, about 85% of people have ADHD, the others don't. And I said to you, you know, just check in, you're like, you've got ADHD. And what you said, I thought that was so true. And you sort of said, maybe, but you haven't really got time for your own ADHD because you're so busy worried, wondering about everybody else and dealing with everybody else's ADHD. A neurodivergent family, same as myself. So what made you obviously are already a nutritionist, what made you bring the ADHD coaching and the ADHD awareness into that?
So, well, I think like lots of people, lockdown in 2020 was a tipping point, and it was the first time that we started to explore neurodivergence within the family. Not because it's the first time it showed up, obviously, but it's the first time that it was given a name.
Yeah.
It happened through a really chance conversation I was having with a friend, an adult female who told me she'd just been given a diagnosis of adult ADHD, she called it at the time.
Right, yeah.
And she described, we were on a socially distanced dog walk, so she had plenty of time to sort of share this experience. And I went from thinking, what a strange thing to say, to the more she described what it was and why, just connections were happening in my head. It was quite emotional, actually. I still get a little bit emotional talking about it, because that conversation resulted in me sort of running home and Googling, does my son have ADHD?
Yeah.
Because she was describing all these random behaviours and random experiences as if they were one thing. So, and then of course, not long into that search, the heritability and family links connection started to be made. So I sat and thought, where's he, if he does, and it seemed like he did, where's it from? And out of the two of us at that time, my husband seemed the far more obvious likely candidate to, and that conversation resulted, we were very lucky, because by the end of 2021, we had, you know, two diagnoses, one through a private route and one through the NHS, which now would take a lot longer, obviously.
Yeah, a bit like myself, probably like the timing. We were lucky that we got in just before the wave, I guess. So obviously with the nutrition side of things, what made you interested in the link between the nutrition and the ADHD? What made you sort of think that you were going to bring this into your work, and how did you feel that was valid?
Yeah, I didn't. Is the short answer to that. I was partway through retraining as a nutritionist at the time, so I was sort of the end of year 2 of 3-year retraining. You know, back to school really for me, because my background's corporate, and I did change career because as an asthmatic and a person with eczema, I discovered that nutrition was really helping me with those symptoms. And through perimenopause, my asthma had become much worse. So my plan was to be an asthma and eczema nutritionist. And I was really doing all my training about that. I was planning on doing my clinical study on that topic. And I'd already started doing quite a bit of research. And then we hit 2020, we got the diagnosis. I started looking at my husband and my son's eating behaviour differently, because I now had this new information. I'd never really been able to understand their eating was so different from, you know, mine, for example.
Mm-hmm.
And I started talking about it. And as soon as I started talking about it, I did a little blog, and I was just about to graduate, and I did a really small interview with somebody. And before I knew it, I was being asked to see people in clinic who were neurodivergent, mostly initially parents of children with ADHD and autism who were, binging on sugar or missing out whole food groups or very, very sensitive to textures. So I always say my niche found me and it just never let go. As soon as I graduated in October 2022, I graduated, and by January, I realised quite quickly this is what I would be specialising in. It wasn't a specialism at the time. It wasn't a niche that people, when I told them, thought I'd made something up and it was a bit daft. But
Yeah.
as the years have gone by, my clinics, I've never worked in a different niche. I just specialise in neurodivergent clients, and I class myself as having become an eating behaviour specialist rather than a nutritionist that works with neurodivergent clients, because what I've realised is this is about eating behaviour.
Yes. Yeah. And well, actually, so that was going to be where I want to go next, is that because that's for me. So my aha moment with, well, one of my many, but with ADHD was, oh my God, I'm not greedy. I'm not, because I graze like a cow. I never get hungry. I'm like a cow. I just graze all day long. I've constantly got my head in the fridge. Very often my husband will be like, you've not eaten your meal. And usually because I'll have picked so much leading up to the meal, I'm not hungry for the meal and all of those sorts of things. And there's, I see this and obviously with business owners, and you say that you work with a lot of entrepreneurs yourself now. One of the things that I see and have experienced myself and still do on busy days is that totally forget to eat, or then maybe have days where I completely overeat, or I make those food decisions that are based more on urgency or emotion or cramming in, like today I've had back-to-back calls. So actually food is something that's like 15 minutes. I'll have a quick cracker or something in between rather than sitting down. So what sort of patterns do you see most in business owners, particularly clients that run businesses and their eating behaviours and their ADHD? Do you see anything specific there?
Yeah, very, very much what you've described, that sort of not scheduled eating is really common, whether you're sort of a young kid in school, sort of not wanting to eat when you get home from school, or whether you're a busy entrepreneur. I've just sort of explained that my first client was my husband, and he's an entrepreneur.
Right.
And the eating behaviour I'm talking about, not understanding, was that he would be coming home at a certain time, and he would know there'd be a cooked meal ready for him that was nutritious and nourishing and stuff that he liked. But by the time he came crashing through the door, he would not be hungry, and then I realised that would be because he had had something from a fast food restaurant on the way home, on the drive home.
Right.
Even though he knew there'd be food there.
Yeah.
But on the way home, he just wanted something, right now, and this food that was on offer on the way home came with, a milkshake and a little hit of dopamine on the way home as well. But then, of course, by 9, 10 o'clock, he'd then be hungry again. So he'd be sneaking out to the garage next door to get a couple of packets of cookies and something else. And there was all this eating around food, which had really confused me. Whereas my son, who was doing his A-levels at the time, I'd have to remind him to eat. He just wouldn't get the signal to eat. He'd always sort of been eaten in that way. But what that leads to, that unscheduled eating, is that sort of bingey, restricted relationship with food. I don't think it's binge eating. I think it's unscheduled emotional eating driven by those impulses that we see, but also just the fact that you will come out of a busy day or a hyper focus, particularly if you're, a self-employed person, an entrepreneur. Your life isn't scheduled, it's reactive.
Yes.
And that's before we start to factor in emotional dysregulation, burnout, all those things where food will often be the very first thing to take a hit.
Yeah.
So that's what I mean by eating. I would rather call myself an eating behaviour coach or an eating behaviour specialist, because this is about helping a person get balance with food and nourish in the way that they need to do what they're expecting their brain and their body and their operating system to do, which is achieve at a very high level.
Yeah. Interestingly, I'm listening to you now. My background, going back to probably about 30 years old, I think I was about, and I trained as a personal trainer. So I've got and then I went on to study the nutrition and all of that stuff. And actually my story is, when I was 18, I was a size 18 because of the way that I ate. I would eat like that, and I had a weight problem. And, in those days, there weren't many girls of my size around. It wasn't, you're going back, I'm 52 now, so you're going back a fair old whack. And but as I got more into nutrition and suddenly I found this way and exercise, and it changed me, and I think it helped manage my ADHD very much. Oh my gosh, I think I realized that I started medicating my ADHD in a good way as opposed to ways that I had done up until that point. But even as I got to into it, and I'm like eating high protein and eating whole foods and, nourishing foods, I would still be grazing. I'd still be like, why am I eating in between meals? Why do I need to eat in between meals? I couldn't. And I would just think, what is wrong with me? Like, I'd eat avocado, apricots and nuts. And it's not always necessarily, I think, do you think it's more what you're eating, or is it the behaviours around it? Because for me, I'd say, my calorie intake was too high because I was snacking. Do you see what I mean? Is there?
Yeah, it's really complex, to be honest. In fact, it might. If I'll share something with you that I've just commissioned recently. Because I've been working out with clients for 3 years. I see these patterns in clinic day in, day out. So to me, they're very much part of the work I do. But I realise when I have people referred to me more and more now from GPs or coaches, that they almost don't believe the way people are reporting that they eat. They don't believe that a person can be having 10 cans of Coke a day. Or they don't believe that a person can get through 3 packets of biscuits in a sitting when they've already. But this is really common. So I commissioned an independent research company to do a survey for me of 500 adults with ADHD. So in order to be part of this survey, they had to have had a diagnosis. And it was about eating behaviour, and just sort of the headlines to share with you are that almost 2/3, which is 63% of those living with ADHD, skip meals at least a couple of times a week, with nearly a quarter skipping meals daily.
Right.
And almost 96% acknowledge that they forget to eat as a result of being hyper-focused on tasks, with more than 1 in 4, 43% saying that happens often. And that most neurodivergent people, 91%, find it difficult to plan or prepare meals. So when you bear in mind how much work actually goes in to planning and prepping meals now, compared to how much we're doing, there's a lot of executive function goes into putting a meal on a table, especially in a family where you're catering for different needs, different schedules. We don't live and eat even the way our grandparents did.
No.
For our grandparents, it could not have been that complex because they had limited resources to feed a family with.
Yes.
They had, then they had more time, and more income went on food. So it couldn't really be, it could be complex, but within quite narrow parameters.
Yeah.
Whereas now we're eating in a way that we have never done at any point in our evolutionary history. It's massive choice, massive overwhelm. It's so easy just to stick something in a microwave or just open a packet and it's done. And our lives are so incredibly hectic and busy. Our schedules are busy. So it's actually really, really complex to just have, nourishing breakfast, lunch and dinner. You're done, you sleep, you go to bed.
Yeah.
That's not our norm.
It's I think as well, it's like I talk about like decision fatigue. So, as the day goes on, you are going to get more and more tired. You're executive, I always like, when is the time of day when you can, make the best decisions? And I know that actually if I always say to clients, and like, it's not something I talk about as much now, but when I used to be like, right, for me, meal planning never worked. I love creating a meal plan. Don't get me wrong. I love it. I'm going to be amazing a week. I'm going to do this and that. I would never, I'd look at it the first day and then I'd forget all about it. So I always think, okay, if I know what I'm eating long enough in advance, maybe 20, to have it in my head, or even if I go, it's a bit like work. If I go to work knowing what I'm going to open my laptop and do, so much easier. If I finish work tonight and I think, right, we're going to have this and this to eat, I can do it. If that isn't there, or if I haven't done that, or if I just have to go and open the fridge, or God forbid, have to go to a supermarket, that for me is completely overwhelming. The decisions that, oh my God, the choice, if you want, I don't know, if you want a jacket potato, for example, there's about 10 different potatoes to choose from. And if you want, do you want cheese on it, or do you want hard cheese? Whatever you're going to have, the choice is exhausting, isn't it?
It absolutely is. And then you've got to get home with that food and prep it and have all the stuff in that you need to prep it. And if you have, as within my own family, many of my clients do that kind of all or nothing thinking. If you haven't got the exact thing you need for this, I know with my son, if we've got the particular branded cheese or certain butter or this, or even the specific plates and things ready, any of those things that form a sort of barrier can then be, right, I don't want to do that at all now. I'll just go back to the toast.
Yeah.
Or I'll just go back to that sort of, and it very much is about that interaction of that particular biochemistry, that particular neurotype, which can involve all those different things like, dopamine seeking behaviours around food, executive function challenges, the prep needed, the emotional regulation needed to have the right appetite to eat at the time that you're supposed to want to eat, that gut-brain connection, that's absolutely vital in order for a person to get the signal to be hungry, get the signal to stop eating.
Yeah.
Because lots of my clients have a bit of leptin resistance, like you say, grazing, eating all day, that natural signal to say, we need to eat, we've had enough. We're not in touch with that biochemistry anymore. And I talk a lot about what eating actually is. Eating is an opportunity to remove hunger.
Yeah.
But it's also an opportunity to nourish. And we are a hunter-gatherer species. That's what we are. For about 100 years, we live in a very different way from the way we have for the 200,000 years before. And our biochemistry is built for hunting and for gathering.
Do you not?
And a neurodivergent person would have made a very good hunter.
Yeah.
Not such a good gatherer.
Do you not see popping down Sainsbury's as hunter-gathering these days?
That's the problem. It's not, is it? The hunting's not there. The gathering is there. But and dopamine would have been that strong motivator to do that, to face into really harsh challenges to get food. That would have been a brutal experience for most of our time as a hunter-gatherer, as a mammal on this planet. That would not have been easy. Would have required a very strong motivator and then a very strong reward, because just not starving to death would not have been enough of a incentive to go and do what we had to do. So what we have now is the struggle isn't there, but the reward mechanism is still the same. Right, the well done, that tastes good, go and get more, go and find more, keep going. And our modern food sources really appeal to our dopamine driven senses for reward, for motivation, for novelty. They are marketed to do that.
Yeah. And I think when you were saying as well about the burnout side of things, when we start to, which inevitably, I don't know about you, but I've yet to work with a client that hasn't experienced burnout. I mean, it's just, I take it as a given really in most cases.
Yeah.
And when that starts to set in, you said earlier, that's when nutrition tends to be one of the first culprits, doesn't it? It's like, I'll push it back, or, like I'm saying about myself, like, I'll just have a few, quickly shove a cracker in between calls, and then I'll go and have another cracker, and then and that's the thing that gets pushed past. And then I suppose, what knock-on effect does that have? What happens to our blood sugar? Because blood sugar is a huge indicator of how we manage our ADHD symptoms. Can you talk actually a little bit about the link between ADHD and blood sugar, or not specifically ADHD, but how it affects us?
Yeah, so one of the things I talk to lots of my clients about, especially where we're talking about emotional regulation and low mood, and even sort of the anger and the rage that we can often see that can come in short or fast spurts, I will talk about blood sugar regulation as part of that, as really understanding that that's sometimes how. So hypoglycemia, sort of a really low blood sugar, a real dip in blood sugar, can be experienced as stress. Yeah. It is experienced as stress by the body. The body experiences hypoglycemia as stress and then sets a stress response off to deal with it. And that will sort of feel like, maybe racing heart and agitation and all those sort of signals in the body. But even just blood sugar fluctuations, fatigue, tiredness, that can often be misunderstood and felt as a mood change, whereas in fact it's a biochemical change.
Yeah.
And when you are grazing throughout the day, which is really, really common, so common, you're more likely to be grazing on carb-rich and sweet-rich foods, quick snacky fixes, less likely to be grazing on, protein, much less likely.
Yeah.
So you end up with this sort of nutrient low, carb high, grazy sort of food, which doesn't nourish, it sort of leads to blood sugar fluctuations, which can be experienced as mood shifts, sudden mood shifts. Literally, we're talking about that hangry kind of, which is it's so common.
I'm so bad for that.
Yeah, and then that needs to fill that hole really quickly with something, just you need to open a cupboard, open a fridge, have it there. There's no time for prep at that point. There's no get the chopping board out, start cutting the avocado in half. Where's the quinoa? That's not happening. It's that, and we all have those things that we go back to and revert to, those quick fixes, trying to then literally feed a biochemical dip in the body. That's your body saying, we're now low, we need to get back up again. But what they're all leading to is a sort of picture of being actually hungry. So people have eaten a lot throughout the day. I'll have clients where we'll look at what they've eaten. They'll have had, a lot to eat in a day, but they're still hungry because they haven't had the basic macronutrient profile they need.
Yeah.
They've been sort of maybe having a long period of not eating, then eating a lot in a really short time, whether that's cramming it into lunchtime or in the evening after you've eaten.
Yeah.
So because there's that lack of sort of scheduled eating and that sort of grazing on carb food, you're sort of undernourished, hungry, and then riding this sort of blood sugar, sort of anything from a mini roller coaster to huge highs and lows throughout the day, depending on what your biochemistry is already like.
Yeah. Do you think, because I think the blood sugar fluctuations, they don't have to be that big, do they?
No, they don't. They don't. Especially if there's something that you're dealing with, commonly.
Yeah.
So if you're sort of responding, and there's also thirst, to factor into this. A lot of my clients, they're thirsty as well, and their body's trying to tell them to have some water because they're actually needing more fluid intake than they've got, but they're experiencing that as hunger. So they're sort of having something to eat rather than something to drink, or they're drinking rather than eating. So they're having, fizzy drinks that, although they claim to have no sugar, no sugar and no calories, they do contain sweeteners. So the body will then release insulin to deal with what is perceived as a sort of sweet taste, if you like. So it's about not being in touch with those, and then you've lost touch with those signals completely. So you're not hearing the message that you're actually hungry now and need to eat, and you're not hearing the message that you're full and you can stop, and blood sugar isn't sort of getting where it's needed in the cells. It's hanging around and in the blood, and before you know it, you're sort of on a mood swing, an energy swing roller coaster.
And then when we have got 100 tabs open, literally, like mentally and literally, what are some of the quick go-to foods that might help and support and sustain us that don't need tons of prep?
So there's a big difference between minimally processed convenience food and ultra processed food. There is a big difference between the two, and a lot of the work with my clients in clinic, certainly in the early stages, is identifying the difference between the two.
Right.
And it's about it's about sort of recognizing that our modern food supply has brought great benefits. We no longer have to travel halfway around the world or, the country to get the food we need. We're not hunting, great. We can get on with our, businesses instead. But relying on ultra processed food as a very large part of our diet is problematic. We end up with lots and lots and lots of ingredients that our microbiome doesn't even can't cope with and understand, that's fibre low, protein low, and nutrient low. Whereas having your kitchen cupboards and freezers and fridges stocked with things that are minimally processed. So a tin of tuna is not an ultra processed food. A tin of peaches, a packet of microwave rice, these things, frozen veg, frozen fruit, so small packets, small containers of yogurt in your fridge that can be easily opened, where you can open a yogurt, get some frozen fruit from the freezer, put it together, and sprinkle some flax seeds on top. These are things that are all you can do in minutes in your kitchen. There's still a bit of prep, but there's no cooking involved. Using pre-cooked chicken and salmon. I know there's good, better, and best. There are really great, organic ways of eating food where there's minimal impact for the environment and minimal ingredients. That's great. That's sort of, if we could all do that, we could all afford to do that, amazing. For somebody who's really struggling, it's about getting the basic nourishment right first. So you can build on that. It's good, better, and best.
Yeah.
And if good is having shredded wheat for breakfast with a couple of, some tinned peaches on top because they taste really nice and sweet, and some milk, and that's nourishing to start the day, great. That's better than a breakfast bar, which has, maybe 10 or 15 ingredients in.
So can I ask you what you think about ADHD and fasting then? Because obviously the whole fasting thing, and sometimes I've talked with clients, well, you're not eating anyway. So how about you fast, you take some decisions away, but then you come in and you have and I'm not saying that's right or wrong. Sometimes I've done that in a conversation, and again, they're not coming to me for nutrition nowadays, they're coming to me but I've been like, well, okay, how about if you leave eating till later in the day, or what are your thoughts on that? Am I right or wrong thing?
It very much depends. Because of what I've just described, because of that difficult relationship with eating in a scheduled way, and because of the grazing, and therefore the sort of eating a lot in a small amount of time, the step between having ADHD that's where it impacts on your diet, because it or doesn't always, but if it does, the step between that and eating in a quite disordered way, or actually at its more extreme, like having an eating disorder, is quite small. It can be quite a small step. So lots of my clients will sort of say things were doing okay for a bit, I was managing, but then I was made redundant, or this thing happened, or I went to university, or something changed, and suddenly the behaviours become really disordered, and they are binge eating, and they're in a cycle of binge restriction, which is problematic. So because of that small step and because of that higher risk, I'm a massive fan of working with my clients to eat in a scheduled way regularly. Now, for some clients, fasting would become part of that program, in a very, very supported way. Because lots of my younger clients will use fasting as a way to control their weight or their appearance or their calorie intake. So we don't want that. It's a case of looking at what are you trying to achieve with the fasting. If you're trying to achieve better blood sugar balance, or if you're trying to achieve eating, more quality food, maybe less of, then that can be helpful. It depends what you're trying to do, and then how you're fasting, whether you're sort of skipping a particular meal because you just find that works for you. So if you're maybe on a 16/8 fast and you find you're not starting to eat till midday, that for some people's biochemistry, for some people's energy, that can be beneficial. Not for everybody.
It's that,
and I'm someone who's trying to get my clients to start the day with something protein based. So but that would be better maybe than maybe a 5-2 fast where you're not eating for 2 days. That would be something I would recommend very rarely. And so it depends on what and why.
I think so there's a couple of things to just go back to that. I think that like you say, so like the 16/8, I have to say, personally, for me, I was very much, I'll skip breakfast because I eat later. What I've realised now is, and, we teach it on ADHD fundamentals. We teach it on Advanced Coach, starting your day with some protein and some fats and getting those neurotransmitters firing and things all firing is the best way. And I certainly now know that I have a breakfast that is quite substantial breakfast. I have it a bit later, but it's substantial. So by 10 or 11 o'clock, I've got, eggs, avocado, smoked salmon or something like that. And
amazing.
That then, but I've noticed, and it's only through noticing the difference in that when I start like that, then that will carry me through. When I've got the back-to-back calls, I'm not like, oh my God, I haven't eaten anything, quick, shove a cracker in, and I feel so much better over the rest of the day. But obviously, I'm lucky. I work from home, and I've carved that, and it's taken a bit of practice to carve that out. But like you say, there's also the other side of it. And for me, sometimes it can be convenient. But like you say, there's also that other side of it where we can have this all or nothing attitude.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes it can get very skewed. You mentioned eating disorders. Let's just touch on that for a moment, because it's so important. Like, what are you seeing? What do you find the link between ADHD and eating disorders? Because we know that there's links between ADHD and disordered eating.
Yeah.
And that can swing to various ends of a spectrum. What's you're finding in practice with that?
So I was trained in eating disorders, things like binge eating disorder. And in my experience in clinic, my clients who are binging, if you like, i.e. eating large amounts of food in a small amount of time in a less controlled way, generally speaking, that's a bit of a different picture from what we understand in nutrition as binge eating disorder. They tend to have different triggers, different things that sort of are the result of that behaviour. So for me, I think it's more common for me to see clients who I would say are eating impulsively and compulsively than actually sort of have binge eating disorder.
Yeah.
So lots and lots and lots of my clients will share with me, especially the more I gently question and remove the shame and the blame and explain how challenging and how real these issues are. They will describe sort of getting to the end of the day and think, oh, I can't believe it. I had like that whole pack of cornettos again, and then I had this. Or at lunchtime when things were really stressful, I had, bags and bags of Haribos, and there'll be many foods that are the culprit, not always sweet things. And that for me is that sort of impulsive, compulsive eating. It's driven by hunger often, because what you've just described, not having had several nourishing macronutrient dense meals throughout the day. So actually but it's also in its simplest term, sort of stimming with food, literally sort of grazing and seeking dopamine hits and stimulation with food. Why would you not? The food's saying that to us.
Yeah.
Also, lots of my clients will be relying heavily on those sort of ultra processed foods, because where we have autistic traits alongside ADHD, which we know is super common, that needs to have sameness and safety, and certain textures in food are delivered by ultra processed food.
Yeah.
So if every single time you have a bag of crisps from your favorite crisp provider, it will taste exactly the same. There's going to be no surprises. You know what the texture is going to be like. It will be absolutely consistent.
Right.
So it really appeals to that need for safety and consistency and reliability in food in a very chaotic world.
Yeah.
Whereas every time you eat an apple or you have a piece of broccoli, the experience could be totally different.
Yeah.
Taste, texture, seasonality, colour, everything. So where there's that need for, safety and control around food, which is common, ultra processed food delivers. But it also does it in the shiny packaging, the buy one, get one free, and the little toy and the new flavour. But so you get this sort of wonderful dopamine-y, shiny packaging, but with the safety of what's inside. But what's not there is that combination of carbohydrates, fats and protein that we need in a meal. So when we're a bit nutrient deficient, we're more likely to reach for much more of those foods because they aren't filling us. They're just, they're on repeat. We're supposed to eat a lot of them. They're kind of multi-packs of things. And then we start to see a bit of maybe even nutrient depletion, coming in, where we are really low on those essential nutrients that we see that we need for neurodivergent brains: iron, magnesium, zinc, those B vitamins. Where they've taken a hit, that can then impact on our appetite and the foods that we seek and the foods we need. So it can be a really complex picture, and unpicking it is best sort of, done case by case if that's possible, because we're all unique. But the disordered eating tends to come more when that binge eating's become something which is a bit more chronic, when you're doing that regularly.
Yeah.
When binging is now a part of your daily and weekly routine, and you feel you can't stop. But also diet culture plays a really big role. Lots of my younger clients, they're very much into whatever the next extreme diet is, and that's replaced scheduled eating. So they'll have tried celery juicing, or they'll be vegan for dietary reasons, or they will be sort of following a carnivore diet, or anything where that's trending and new and is cutting out whole food groups and is attached to either appearance or physical gains or something else. And then that relationship gets really skewed. And for younger people, that we are seeing more and more of that tipping into that really disordered eating.
Right. And it can be, I suppose, as well, I'm thinking of that as, even, do you know what, even myself with years and years of knowledge and awareness and reading and studying, when you talk about, I mean, I wouldn't say that I dieted for years. I don't, I haven't done it. But when I did, you can get lost, can't you, in all the information, and this is working for me, and ketogenic, or I'm going to do fasting, or I'm going to do this, or I'm going to do that, and then in the end, and I've seen this before, where people will be like, right, I'm going to do like some sort of high fat, low carb, or high protein, low carb diet, and then what they end up doing is eating a high fat, high carb, or you know what I mean, and that's just a killer. I'm like, oh my god, don't do that. But the information starts to blur, and then we don't know, and it can become, you can't see the wood for the trees, and you can end up worse off and more.
Well, the cycle's horrible because those diets very rarely are going to last. They're not doable long term because they are restricting whole food groups, and they really make you hyper focus on food as well. So the actual diets themselves aren't long term solutions, but many of my clients, when they've tried all of them, they feel they have failed at all of them because one slip, the keto diet, one sort of like, God, I've got to have that, cake, and then that's it. And then they feel like they failed. And because they have that all or nothing thinking, the whole thing's out and they're going back to a worse position than they were before. Whereas it's not them, it's that diet was never going to work long term.
Yeah.
But the difficult work is trying to say we need to ignore all that diet noise. We need to ignore the next big diet that promises the next big solution, and instead try and bring scheduled eating that's covering the basics into a person's plan. And that actually is harder work than some extreme fasting diet.
Yeah.
Because the motivation to do that and the the will to do it can be really strong for a while. Most of my clients will have done it and done it well, for a good couple of weeks.
Isn't it? It's it's a bit exciting. It's our thing, isn't it? It's like, it's new. Oh, I'm going to try, this is going to be the answer. Done it for 3 days. I feel amazing. This is brilliant. Come back a week later, you're like, oh my God, I feel awful, or that's not worked, or 100%. Can you just clarify for me? So where you talk about scheduled eating, what does that mean for you and your clients? What does that look like, scheduled eating?
So the reason I say scheduled eating is because I'm not a fan of terms like breakfast, lunch and dinner. I try and avoid them. So a bit about sort of how I work in clinic is to say, first of all, we try and remove labels from food wherever we can. And even breakfast, lunch and dinner, we remove those labels simply because the minute I tell a client they don't have to have breakfast, they just need to eat early, and it removes the need to eat those breakfast type foods, and they realise they can have some of last night's chili to start the day, or some, then that can be really liberating because they don't like breakfast type foods, and they can just have a chicken portion, to start the day with. That's great. Chicken sandwich, something. So what we mean by scheduled eating is eating at regular intervals throughout the day that works for you.
Yeah.
So it might be that we need to eat in 3 time scales. So I use time scales like 7 a.m. to 1 p.m., 1 p.m. to 7 p.m., 7 p.m. to 1 a.m. And we can adapt that if someone's shift working or getting up later or starting the day at 4 a.m. But we put 3 time slots in place, and we say we're going to eat something that's protein, carb, and a small amount of fat based at some point in those 3 windows, so that you don't have more than a 6-hour window that you haven't eaten. And then we sort of look at what that needs to be. And that can be that you've had a couple of snacks in that window, because in the middle of the day, you don't want to sit down at midday and have our lunch. It just doesn't work that way. Okay, honour that choice, that's fine. But we need to have something protein, carb, and, balanced in that time. If we have a window where you've just grazed and had carbs, you're probably far more likely to eat compulsively or impulsively in the next window.
Right.
break your day down into 3 sort of equal chunks, and just make sure that you're giving it a tick at some point in that window that you've at the very least had something protein based and some fibre.
Okay.
And then we look at, how we're going to do that. So what's realistic and what's in your local supermarket that's going to deliver, that protein, fibre and a bit of fat in a way which is just opening, putting together and making something super fast and easy. And then we can build on that.
And I think I'm just thinking back as well to a time when I remember actually I did, and my eating has always felt out of control to me. Now, it's not been out of control to the point where it's been an eating disorder, but like I say, it's always been disordered eating. And I remember a time many, many years ago where I actually did timed eating. So I'd be like, you're right, I have my breakfast at this time. I have my lunch at, 1 o'clock, have lunch. Sit, and actually it worked really well for me. And I'm just thinking about my brain, and actually it was having that schedule, it was having that scaffolding, and it was taking some of the decisions away. It was like, eat at this time, eat at that time. Now, I know that wouldn't work for everyone. I think, like you're saying, it's finding what works for you and making that okay, isn't it?
It is, and it's honouring. It's saying, so many of my clients, when they'll say, "Well, I say, what kind of, what kind of textures do you like and dislike?" And they'll sort of be embarrassed to admit the textures they do and don't like, and I'll say, "That's fine.
Yeah.
If you don't like those textures, you don't like those textures. What textures do you like, and what can we work with?" And honour your needs, whilst also recognising that if we put simple steps in place, and we'll usually work one meal at a time. So we'll sort of put the 3 windows in place, and we'll say, which one are we going to work on to make sure that at least you've got that meal sorted and settled.
What about if you eat the same thing every day? Because that's the other thing, is eating the same foods again and again and again, which I guess is like for you, that, like you were saying, that familiarity, that safety. What about nutrition-wise? Is that...
Yeah, so and that's really common, especially with younger children, and especially with the clients where they've got the autism diagnosis, sort of early on or first.
Children.
Yeah, absolutely. And so the first thing I will say is, don't. If we're talking more to parents, it's common for adults too, but sort of more for parents, because lots of parents are, a big part of my clinic. Is my first tip is don't ever remove or take away a food that is an accepted food for your child. Even if it's a really annoying food, but if it's something that they're eating, avoid the temptation to say you can have that when you've had this. So always sort of keep the safe, or safe is a word I don't like, because it confirms that other foods aren't safe, but they're accepted and liked foods, their favourite foods. Always have those available, and the same for you as an adult. And then we sort of try and work on including what we want with what we need.
Right. Yeah.
So a bit of layering there. So, okay, I really want, I'm having pot noodles at the moment. That's what I'm having. It's, it's food.
Yeah.
It's a calorie. It's great. That's what we want to start. I'd rather somebody sort of started with 3 pot noodles a day and we added something in. They said, I can't have another pot noodle. It's not right. I won't. Then they'll end up skipping it and not having it. So where we've got someone that's eating a lot of the same thing, we do that sort of what you want with what you need, and then we'll sort of see if we can add something on around that. Avoiding the temptation to say, if you have that, you can have this, because then that food you're trying to get them to have more of becomes the food that they don't want in order to get the reward, and using food as a reward is not great. And the only problem with finding a healthy food you want to include, like overnight oats is a really popular one. My clients say, well, I'm having overnight oats for breakfast, is that if you do it to death, you'll end up consigning it to the never again bin. And we see that a lot. Did that, my own husband did that. He sort of been making them every day, got to about 3 or 4 months in, and then trying to get him to ever have them again was a problem, because so trying to bring some sort of variety into whatever you're doing. If you're having overnight oats or something, just vary the fruit, or vary, something else you're doing, or even vary the container it's in.
Yeah.
Because you don't want to consign it to the dopamine bin, where dopamine's gone. There's no novelty left there, no excitement. You've done it to death. Never want to see it again.
Yeah.
And that can happen really easily around food. So just don't try and not rely on 1 or 2 things. Try and bring some sort of. So you're better off working on 1 meal you want to really improve.
Yeah.
If you want it to be that early meal, call it breakfast if that works. Finding 2 or 3 things that you can, get easily in your kitchen together, and make that the thing that you focus on. So that becomes a habit. And a habit needs a visual cue to start it off. So make sure it's in your kitchen. There's some visual reminder there for you to do that so that you can then stack a habit on it.
Yeah.
Start with what you want, add in what you need, and don't worry about the labels of what you've been told is healthy or unhealthy. Just nourish yourself and then start to think how you can make that more nourishing.
Okay. Let me just start rounding up, but one of the questions that I do want to just ask you before we go is, what's the success rate with this? Like, how, so I know from my work, like the gut microbiome, we feed that. So if somebody eats a lot of ultra processed food, if they eat a lot of sugar, they're going to constantly want sugar. It takes a while to change that microbiome, and then you might find yourself craving salads, etc., etc. But so I kind of like understand that on a biological, physiological level it can happen, but what really is the success rate for people with this? How do you...
Really good.
Yeah.
Really good. When I worked, when I was planning on supporting clients with asthma and eczema, I did that for a whole year. My first year observing clients in clinic, there was a degree of success with a plan that I would put together for a client, and then they would come into a clinic 6 weeks later, and they'd maybe followed one or two of the suggestions. But I find that by the time I'm working with somebody in clinic, they're that motivated to make some changes. That once it becomes a motivator, and once we put some simple, uncomplicated systems in place and remove some of the barriers, it can be really transformational. Yeah. So much of it is about saying to somebody, this is not you, you're not lazy, you're not greedy, you're not useless, you're not, I know you feel like you've tried and failed. I really do talk about what we are instinctively talking about here and how challenging it can be. And for many of my clients, that conversation at the beginning alone is so just edifying and supportive. And when I'll do a talk at one of the big events I do, and there'll be sort of 50, 60 people in a room all nodding and saying, yeah, that's me. That alone, just not feeling alone and just not feeling useless. I've had some heartbreaking conversations with people, very, very successful people running large organizations, or professional sports people who have huge followings but have this secret about feeling chaotic around food. The minute they realize that it's not their fault, they're not being the things they're telling themselves, there are simple solutions. We can put simple steps in place in someone's kitchen within 24 hours that make them make those barriers much less of a problem. Then absolutely, you can make huge changes.
One of my clients was at an event that you were at, and she came back and she went, oh my God, you've got to see this. Look at this recipe book that I've bought. Isn't this just brilliant? Like, how ADHD friendly is this? And she sent me a little video, and I was like, I know that lady. I said, that's Sarah. So, where can people find you? Give us a rundown of what's in that book, because when I looked at it, I thought, oh my gosh, it was like 3 or 4 ingredients and how to put together a healthy meal really quickly. And I think sometimes we think in our heads, oh my God, to eat healthily, I've got to go through all these steps. But I very much have been like, what that recipe book that you've created, that's how I cook for years. Like 4 or 5 ingredients maximum, all natural, just thrown in. Usually no cooking, if any. Tell us a little bit about that book and what else you've got on offer and where people can find you, Sarah.
Well, on my website, which is nutrition.co.uk, there's new recipes each month, and they are meant to be really accessible. So this isn't to say that cooking and prepping fresh ingredient isn't absolutely amazing, but it means that we need to reach somebody where they're at, as Ed Halliwell says, meet them where they're at, but don't leave them there. So it's whatever stage you're at and the kind of level of support you need. So this is not to say that everybody with ADHD needs just a tin opener, a tin and in the kitchen, and that's it. Many of my clients love cooking and they love eating. They just need support knowing how to do that in a way that's less complicated or wasteful. But everything from just having one of the guides where we're sort of using 3 or 4 convenience foods to put a meal together that doesn't require cooking, that can be bought in any local supermarket cheaply and isn't skipping nutrition. That's the important part. You're not compromising.
What would be an example? Have you got one example you could give us of that sort of
Yeah,
meal?
so an example would be if you're really, if a sweet tooth is, really, really problematic in what you're doing a lot, then just having some chunks of frozen mango in your freezer, and putting them in a blender with a squeeze of lime and having a really nice mango sorbet. That's that done. It's from just if you want to use if you're really lacking in nourishment and you need to get more fibre and that's your thing, having one of those really cheap 30 or 40 pound soup makers that are like a kettle
Yeah.
in your kitchen. They're like a kettle. They work like a kettle. I use them all the time. And having 3 or 4 bags of pre-cut that you can buy from any counter veg. So a bag of pre-cut potatoes, pre-cut sweet potatoes, and a tin of some frozen green veg, and sticking those in that soup maker with some really nice bone broth stock or something.
Yeah.
Setting it off, going away, and come back 20 minutes later, and it's done, and you've got a very high fibre soup. If you can stick a tin of beans in there as well, butter beans or something like that. Or just having a tin of tuna and some tilde rice, and opening that, putting them together, cook it or don't cook it. You've got something there which is minimally processed. It's not got 20 ingredients, but it's nourishing. And these are all things that you can just buy you can get them on the way home at 9 o'clock at night or 10 o'clock at night. And it's still better than sort of having a tuna pasta bake that's going to be put in your microwave, that you're literally sort of feeding your microbiome about sometimes in the region of 20 or 30 ingredients and additives,
Right.
that your microbiome's then got to recognise and process, and a lot of things that maybe aren't as healthy.
Yeah. Yeah.
We don't need as many ingredients. We don't need, all this complexity. We can serve ourselves really well.
Yeah.
With a couple of simple staples from the supermarket.
Yeah. Brilliant. So we can find you. We're going to put the in the show notes, and we'll put your where to find you. But people can come find you at So Nutrition.
Yep.
Anything else we need to know about you and where to find you, Sarah?
Yeah, I do lots of free workshops. So I do lots of free workshops for ADHD UK. So if you sort of want to drop in there once a month and ask specific questions, we'll do a Q&A. And there are, on my website, are a range of books that are available to buy from Amazon and other booksellers, that are sort of recipes or books about the nervous system in ADHD, or about how to support very highly selective eating in your home in a way that will. I've tried to bring as much clinical information out of a private clinic as possible, safely, so that it's accessible at various different entry points. So they're all very, very cheap, and lots of them give huge amounts of really useful information that you can use in your own homes and kitchens.
Yeah, and they really are useful and amazingly laid out, and very, very friendly. Like I say, my client didn't even know that I knew you. I was like, oh, she's sort of. Thank you, Sarah.
Oh, that's good to know.
Thank you so much for today.
No problem. It's been so nice chatting to you, Kim, and I have brought so much of the information that I've learned on the course over that year into my clinic. It's completely changed my clinic. So much of what we've talked about today is because I've learned so much about how to adapt my clinic and understand all the different nuances that my clients bring in a way which has really changed my own practice. So thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you. I think just on that, I think that's probably the case for so many of us. I was just thinking, imagine if you'd have gone into this as I went into coaching, not knowing ADHD. I think you would have seen a stream of people come through your, and probably a lot of what you've said you would apply, but it's not having that understanding of why they can't, why it's difficult, the executive function. I know it's really changed coaching for me, really changed. So
yeah, absolutely.
Brilliant. Thank you, Sarah.